What is the weirdest story or myth your country or religion has? One of the weirdest is one of the guy that chops off a kid's thumbs because it still sucks them. In Monterrey, Mexico, there's a creepy urban legend about a dog eating cereal with a spoon, and, believe it or not, a lot of people are afraid of. Johnny Appleseed is a trip. He wandered around planting apple seeds, and the story talks about how he fed westward expansion. Except, apples are from seeds? You're almost certainly not going to get an edible apple. You can make fermented hard apple cider from them, though. He didn't feed expansion, he boozed it up. And this is a children's story. The little town I lived in has a child's grave in the older part of the cemetery. It is the only grave in the entire town that has a spiked fence and stones on top of where the body would be. It sticks out when you walk through the cemetery. Further, there's about 6 to 10 feet where there are no other graves, not the parents, no other kids or relatives. Local teens started circulating a myth that the child was born to a witch who was subsequently murdered after birthing the child. The myth goes that when the child died, they put spikes and stones on the grave to stop the child from rising and killing the townspeople, as the child would have been a witch as well. This myth circulated so widely that the cemetery put up a little board on the grave saying that the extras on the grave were to prevent animals from digging up the body. It didn't make as much sense to the town's teens, as it was the only grave in town with those safety measures. People, mostly teens, still to this day, do give gifts to the lonely child, lovingly referred to as the witch baby, from coins to stuffed animals and flowers. I grew up pretty close to this small town whose name means fragrant water in my local language. How did that come to be, you say? Well, I'm glad you asked. Apparently, long ago, there's a king who's suspicious of his wife. He's all like, "Girl, you're cheating. You gotta be." And the queen was like, "No, I'm not, I swear." But the king was not convinced and kept accusing her. Eventually, he decided that the queen is to be sentenced to death. Exasperated, the queen said, "Fine, kill me. But then throw my body into this water right here, and if I'm innocent, the water will become fragrant." The king was like, "LOL, yeah right, go die now, /stab. Well, she died. But they humored her and threw her body into the river or lake or whatever. It's a body of water. Anyway, lo and behold, a strong flower fragrance starts wafting in the air, just as the queen said it would if she was innocent. The king fell to his knees, probably waving his fist to the clouds, yelling a dramatic, "No!" And then they named the town Fragrant Water, after this legend of a lady who died of shitty husbanditis, an extremely common disease back in the day. I'll let y'all decide what message or lesson they're trying to convey by naming their town after this legend. Think before you stab your wives, I guess. In 1967, the then Prime Minister of Australia, Harold Holt, swam out to sea and was swept away. It was said that he was caught in a rip and dragged out by the current. One of the biggest search operations took place in order to locate him, but was unsuccessful. His body has never been found, and this has generated a whole bunch of theories. But yeah, pretty weird. While growing up on the east coast of the United States, I would say that the Jersey Devil was the strangest one that I heard, with the Chesapeake Bay Monster being the most wholesome, mostly because of all the children's books about Chessie. Fionn Mac Cumhaill. Some myths have him as a giant in Antrim in Ireland. He argues with a Scottish giant, and both start building a bridge to each other to fight, building the Giant's Causeway. Fionn grabs a lump of land and throws it into the ocean, making the Lake Loch Ness from the missing land and forming the Isle of Man. As the bridge grows, Finn realizes the Scottish giant is fucking massive and shits himself. Fionn runs home, and his wife comes up with the idea of dressing him as a giant baby to hide him. Scottish giant arrives at Fionn's home looking for a fight. The wife says he is gone, but coming home soon, and invites the Scot in. There, the Scot is amazed at the size of the baby, half his size. The Scot is then fed rocks in his beard, which breaks his teeth, while the wife fakes giving the same rock bread to Fionn. Scottish giant gets his finger bitten off by Fionn and panics. He then ran back to Scotland in fear of what the size of the baby's father must be, destroying the causeway as he went. Loads of other legends to do with fairies and all, but most have been transformed by the Catholic Church and the original story gone. Now they all end in, and the hero met St. Patrick before he died, renounced his pagan ways, and became Catholic. You know the Loch Ness Monster, right? Well, there's a similar creature that allegedly swims around in Lake Erie, except this being the American Midwest, they named the creature Bessie, of all things. Not a local to New Zealand, but read about the myths of the Maori used to tell that explained how things were. In particular, some revolved around a demigod named Maui, not Maui from Moana, the historical Maui. There's a lot of odd stories about him, but I'll recap my favorites, of which I have two to mention. First, the story follows the villagers of Maui's group to become mad, because according to the myth, a full day took 12 hours instead of 24. Understandably, the villagers were pretty pissed off about it, so Maui and his companions, including his brother, set out to cross the ocean to find where the sun rises. They then pull the entire fucking sun down with hooks and ropes. Maui yells at the sun god to give his people longer days, or they'll keep him down forever. The sun complies, and the gang leaves, now with 24-hour days. The next one isn't as mind-blowing as the last, but still ridiculous. One day, Maui and his brother go out on a waka. Waka, basically it's a Polynesian canoe, and head north in search of fish. As according to the memory, there wasn't enough fish near the mainland, so they traveled out to sea for a long while. Eventually, they came to a nice fishing spot, used this hook to fish. It should be noted at this point, Maui's trusty hook is actually made out of one of his grandfather's bones. Eventually, Maui catches a stingray, but not just any stingray. The stingray that was the size of the entire North Island of New Zealand. Using only his hook and strength, mind you, although he was a demigod, still that's pretty impressive. He pulls it up to the surface and admires his catch. He warns his brother not to kill the fish, as he had to go and do something. Can't remember the something he had to do. Of course, his brothers give in to temptation and kill the gigantic stingray, causing its body to transform into an island, sprouting trees and forming mountains. Maui comes back and is pretty pissed off with his brothers. He then returns back home with his brothers, and they argue a bunch, I think. And according to Maori mythology, that's why the North Island is shaped like a stingray. For those who don't see it, Wellington is the head, New Plymouth is one of its fins, and Kaitia is the tip of the barbed tail. Sorry for the long story, but I just found these two interesting enough to talk about. If you want to hear more stories like this about Maui, do some Googling. There's plenty more stories than those two. Or just listen to You're Welcome. Small town I grew up in has a legend that a lady of some notoriety died and was buried on top of a short mountain. Heavy rains came one year, flooded the area, and washed her coffin all the way back into town. They celebrated this legend every year by having coffin races down the main street in town. Indian. Lots of gods and demons of all sorts abound in local folklore and official religious lores. Predictably, the first set is cooler. One of the archetypes of local folklore is that people who are killed unjustly, especially if they are virgin girls, get to come back with supernatural powers. What they do with such powers depends on their character while alive and how bad their death was. The usual pattern is that the girl comes back as an avenging spirit and kills the guys directly responsible, then moves on to their family and anyone else in the neighborhood, catch them, suck their blood, eat them, leave only nails and hair to be found next morning, or make them vomit blood and die. By the time a few deaths happen, the stories usually have a sorcerer brought in. He binds or bargains with the ghost, convinces her to stop eating random guys now that her revenge is done, and promises that the locals will worship her as a goddess. The ghost gets promoted to goddess, a small shrine is built, people worship and bring offerings. There are such shrines in almost all local villages, and a lot of, mostly old folk, will swear that they have seen the ghost hanging out there on full moon nights. There's a modern-day myth of black panthers roaming around the Australian bush. Australia has no confirmed big cat species, but many people claim to have seen a black panther running around. This myth is not to be confused with the myth that the long thought to be extinct thylacine is still alive and kicking. People claim to have seen this panther on farms, in the bush, and most commonly running across the road while driving at night. It's not as well known as something like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, but it's one of those legends where people claim to have a friend of a friend of a friend of a guy I know who says he's seen it. My great aunt and uncle swear that they saw a black panther run across the road in front of them one late afternoon about 30 years ago. They both saw it and agree that it was way too big to be a normal cat or even a large dog. I'm not going to say I'm 100% certain that the panthers are really out there, but if they are, they sure would have a lot of places to hide, as Australia is a bloody big place. I also find it interesting that reports of this thing are made all over the country, often from people who didn't know anything about it beforehand, just like my great aunt and uncle. Pretty sure some variant of this one exists anywhere, but in my hometown we had a railroad crossing where legend says a school bus stalled on the tracks. For some reason, no one could get off the bus and all the kids were killed. Now, if you stop at the tracks and put your car into neutral, you'll miraculously start to move across the tracks until you're safe. Even more spooky, if you dust the trunk of your car with talcum, you'll even see ghostly handprints. There have been several real documented cases of this happening, and it sounds pretty damn legit, until you start to think about it. Anywhere this story happens, you'll notice the side of the tracks where you put your car into neutral is on a slight incline down. So really, you're just rolling across the tracks with momentum. The ghostly handprints? Your own gross body at work. You leave oil on everything you touch, and it doesn't always wash off. So you're really seeing your own handprints or even small children's that might have been playing around your car. Sorry guys, a bunch of dead ghost babies isn't pushing you to safety. Or are they? So, this was a while ago, and may still be going in some places, not too sure, but in Norway, there was a myth in the 1950s and beyond that people from northern Norway did not have houses, cars, phones, or proper clothes. People from the north were therefore treated as second-class citizens when it came to moving into apartments or houses, even student housing. There would be a small text with something along the lines of, "No northerners allowed." This also went to applying for jobs, leading to a lot of people changing or faking dialects, even changing last names. This went on until they were replaced by the refugee wave that came. So sadly, the discrimination did not go away. They just found someone else to pick on. And for those who still believe the myths about northerners of Norway, you're wrong. Northern Norway is just as developed as the rest of the country, all the way up to North Cape and Nordkapp. It is now illegal to discriminate against race or place of birth, or anything along those lines in Norway. One of the weirdest was popularly known as the Onion Witch. The witch would knock on your door, ask for bread and onion, then she'd break open the onion, and if it dripped blood, then your family members would die. And the number of family members that'd die would be known by the numbers of pieces she'd break the bread into. In my culture, we play string game, like making shapes from a circle of string with our hands to tell a story or just for games, but only ever play during the winter. Within our culture, everything is through oral teaching, so it may vary, but this is the version my paternal grandmother told me about why we do not play string game when it's not snowing. My people believed we lived in a series of worlds, 4 in total. The third world was taken over by the Big Flood, and to escape, our people climbed a giant branch to the top of the sky. They could see the fourth world above, but couldn't reach it, so a superhuman lady named Spider-Woman, not the comic book kind, used her gift to weave a ladder to the fourth world and helped our people escape the flood below. Now, we do not play with yarn or string games unless there is snow on our sacred mountains, because then Spider-Woman and her children will be sleeping during winter. We see it as a sign of mockery or disrespect, as I understand or can explain it because my family also doesn't speak English as a first language, to Spider-Woman because she helped save our people from the flood that consumed the third world. So, we were told if we don't abide by the rules, Spider-Woman will know. Then she'll climb down her tall tower with all her little spider children following behind. She'll come into your room while the house sleeps and wrap or weave you in her web. And then she'll let her spider children eat your eyeballs out. That bedtime story or lesson traumatized me most of my life, but there's no way I'll break that rule. Yikes. The Gorbals Vampire, 1954. Stories of a 7-foot-tall vampire haunting the southern necropolis in Glasgow went around. What happened? Over the course of 3 days, around 400 schoolchildren descended on the necropolis with makeshift weapons looking to beat the ever-unliving shit out of it. I fucking love my city. We used to take 2 goats, one that was perfect and one that was not. We would sacrifice the perfect goat to our deity, but before that, we would cast all of our sins into the imperfect goat. We didn't sacrifice the ugly, sinful goat in the traditional manner. Rather, we would chase him off of a cliff with all of our sins going with him. This blood magic is the origin of the scapegoat. Then we took this tiny but effective spell and figured out how to cast a permanent version of it. And that's the origin of one of the world's greatest religions. I've been waiting for this. We got a ton of those in my country. Back when my country was pagan, we had the strangest gods. My apologies, I'm not able to translate the names in English, like Baklopo, god of the flies, Cloacina, goddess of sewers, Sterculus, god of excrements, and the list goes on. Then we got urban myths, like the one of the ghosts of women in a running suit that stops people to talk about air polluting, black ambulance that kidnaps children to take their organs, butterflies that some people believe are the souls of deaths, and if you step on them, you will die horribly. Morkies gnomes-like creatures that mute in trees and bushes to make it hard for travelers to cross the road. In a church is kept a rib of a dragon who was taken down by a saint. There are 2 old castles who are connected by labyrinths with paints of pagan gods and alchemical symbols that nobody knows what represent. There's a column that has 2 holes in it, and the legend says that they were caused by the devil's horns, who was kicked in the ass by some other saint and fell onto the column. There's a bridge that they say was built by the devil, tricked by Archangel Michael. We're a bunch of loonies. In many places in North America, there is the Wendigo. Usually, it's a cursed creature that used to be human, but the human resorted to cannibalism and was cursed or transformed to become a creature that was always starving, but could never eat its fill. It's usually portrayed as a skeletal humanoid creature with long claws and antlers on its head.